Bye bye. Welcome back. In this next video I'm gonna talk about how to assemble the front controller box, how to assemble the rear battery box, how to mount the controller on the bottom heatsink, because I don't really like the idea of the top cooling system that many people use. Also, I'll cover some basic wiring, mostly the specifics of the split box, how the cables are routed from the back to the front, what kind of wires to use and such stuff. Some basic wiring of the BMS and the controller. There's going to be a lot of specifications about the build, how to put everything together. There's a lot of tricks I want to show you, and hopefully they will help you make your own VXwheel version 3. There's also a kit of parts that are not that easy to make at home that I have available. If you want them, let me know. Otherwise, feel free to use the open source files. The link for them is in the description below. As you can see, for the battery box 5, there is a holder and a hole in the front controller box. So, as an optional, if you don't want this hole to go directly to the front bumper, for additional protection and for better waterproofment, I also designed a plate that goes under this. Later I will show you, we'll seal it up to this plate. It's 2mm thick, so we need to get this part 2mm down. Those things are 3mm of height, so we actually need to put them down for 2mm only, and 1mm will stay. So it's really not a big deal, because this is just some reinforcements, and with the metal plate you will not need it. But as said, this is totally an optional. You don't need to do it if you don't want. If you seal this plate to this hole with silicone after installation, it will be totally fine as well. So if the plate now fits inside like this, and you did not get through it on the other side, it means you did a great job. Don't forget about those that will go in the footpad. Speaking of optionals, as you can see on the original footpad, there's only 2 holes here and 2 on the back. In the original design, the battery box and the controller box under this plate are already covered with another cover and actually sealed up, which is not gonna be in my case, because I want to have easy removable footpads to access the battery to take it out. This is why I'm adding this plate that will press equally on the rails. We align this hole and this hole. I have 2 here that I'm gonna drill, so we'll have 2 screws more on that side, and the same I'm gonna need to do here on the rails. And this way I'm gonna have 4 screws like this and 2 in the front, holding same as on my VXwheel design. This will hold the whole footpad more equally pressed against the rails, and also sealed because I have a sealant here in between. As said, this is just an optional, but I'm gonna drill it and you can decide if you're gonna do it or not. Just added this for the flat-headed screw. When I ordered spare parts for the one wheel for this build, I actually ordered 2 rear footpads, and I got 1 rear footpad that looks kinda new, and the front one, I don't know why I didn't get the second rear one in good shape. I got the front one in a bit of bad shape that clearly got some water underneath. Anyway, now that the holes are done, I need to sand this smooth. Applied 3 layers of clear coat to it so it looks nice. Making the sensor once again from copper tape and Velostat. That's the old footpad. You don't want the sensor to be too close to this edge, because you might crash it and then you might experience ghosting things, so keep it a little bit away from the edge. here it's not needed. Make another edge here, and yeah, then we'll make it. Okay, I'm not gonna lose much time explaining the sensor, because there's a video on my channel explaining the sensor in details. I'm happy with the sensors I'm using till now, but there's always a chance to improve them, so I'm kinda just experimenting here what to do. And yeah, this is how the new one will look like. Let's solder the connections, let's isolate the central part, cover it with Velostat and another layer of foil and grip tape. So yeah, let's do that. Got all the parts from anodization. They look so nice, also engraved, 2 of them. Now we should do taps here. I'll use M3. You should always do taps after the anodization, because anodization process can eat the taps. Depends on where you do it and the quality, but better be safe and do it after. I'm gonna use metric screws wherever I can. Those original ones are not metric. I forgot what's the type of them. Maybe I'll add it later. But it's slightly smaller than M5. So I'm gonna just retap them to M5. And everything should be alright. Since this is gonna be my cover for the battery box, this plate is gonna go over and add some strength to it. Also, since it's gonna be flat, it's gonna be easier to seal. So I'll just screw this down, same I did on my VX design. It's a little bend here, but I cut it here, so it's very easy to bend and to adapt to the shape of the original footpad. Use the screws to center the plate to the wood, and then drill those holes for the self-tapping wood screws. Footpad is very thin on this side, while it's a bit thicker on this side, so you should be very careful for those holes not to drill them through. Just drill a tiny bit. Also, the screws I'm gonna use are very short on those holes, while here I will use the longer ones. And that's our rear footpad. Be careful not to over tighten these short screws, because you will damage the wood and they won't stick. So do it carefully by hand, not with the machine. Only missing the grip tape, which I'm gonna laser cut and apply to it a tiny bit later. Ended up buying another grip tape, because that one I didn't like it so much. Here we have the custom VXwheel grip tape. Okay, so as mentioned, I added these 2 holes to hold my footpads better, because that's gonna be the top cover, covering the battery. Nothing else is gonna be covering it. Therefore, we need to actually drill those holes also in the rails. Let's do this by screwing in the holes that already exist. Watch out for the frame to be parallel. You can just put it on the side and it's gonna be flat. Help yourself with some clips like this. Now we need to drill those holes. All done. I've seen online many people have problems with those threads on the XR rails being ripped off after some time and not holding anymore. So let's see how you can fix that. That's the front print I'm gonna use. That's the battery housing print I'm gonna use. Anyway, getting those supports out is sometimes not an easy job, and it makes the print ugly, but once you're done, you should heat it up with a heat gun and all of those white marks are gonna go away. So let's talk a bit about the system with the little FOCer being mounted on the bottom plate. As many of the current solutions are mounting it on the top, I want to mount it on the bottom, being fixed on this heatsink that's gonna connect here and here also to the rails for additional cooling, while this is gonna be just the battery protection. This is the battery frame that will hold it in place, and this is the 3D printed front controller. I'm gonna assemble this with those screws. I made M3 threads here. If you want it to be watertight, you should put some silicone on the edge, same on this edge, while assembling this. So after screwing all of those screws all around, including this battery frame, those two, you should get something like this. As already mentioned, that's an optional, you don't need to put this plate. It could work also without it. I think the easiest way to mount this nut for the cable gland is to heat it up a bit. Once that corner is inside, just press it in, and now we can mount the cable glands from here. I'm using M20 cable glands. I will write the thread, also maybe the link of them in the description. I just mounted the charging connector. All charging leads need to go angled because there's the battery pack, so they can't go straight out. In case you're wondering what's that red thing, it's plastic dip liquid rubber. Now we shall mount the power on button, the lights button, and the voltage display. Okay, power button is installed, as well as the second one that is hidden in the handle, and I'm using for powering on the lights, as well as the voltage display. It's mounted. You need to chop off the housing of it to fit. I wanted to make it so that you don't have to chop off the housing, but then the display would be very far away here down, and there would be not enough space for the handle, so I decided to chop off that. So this will go above, and there is the condensator gap, so this goes above. All we need to do now is isolate this well. I isolated the voltage display with some foam tape and looks all good. Those are the nuts I used for the battery box. The easiest way to do is to heat them up quite a lot and screw them in very fast. Added some glue at the end to cover it up. It doesn't look perfect, but I think it will hold well. While on the front box, I didn't do big holes here. I think I'm just gonna make a thread inside here and it's gonna be good enough. We'll see. So the little FOCer controller goes right here, directly on the aluminum plate for cooling, but don't forget about a piece of gap filler because the fats need to be isolated from the bottom plate. So let's mount this on. I also put Kapton tape on the fats, just one layer for double isolation. Gap fillers there. Well, all screwed in to the tabs in the heatsink. Also use some Loctite just in case. What I don't like about this FOCer design is that around the screw head there are already some traces. I used fiber washers just in case, not to do any short, but it would be very nicer to have a free PCB around the screw. But okay, it is what it is. Gap filler is down. By the way, we have custom PCB front and rear lights. I'm gonna talk about them either in a separate video or later, but for now I just wanted to tell you that this gap is gonna be covered by the acrylic, glued with some probably clear silicone, and yeah, the PCB will be behind it. So that's that about lights. 1mm acrylic for the lights is glued up. Of course not the nicest job, but it's hard to do better. I did it with medium cyanoacrylate fast glue. It was still way easier than to glue with silicone. Some drops of 5-minute fast epoxy glue, and the lights are in place, as well as in the front box. Looking all good, except from that, I don't know why it hits, because the cable gland is there in basically all designs. Maybe I used a bigger one, I don't know. I don't have time to deal with it. I'm just gonna grind a little bit of this away and it's gonna be all good. So I'm using the Ennoid BMS. It's nice they included balance slits, although I didn't expect it, so I purchased my own connectors. Well, they will be for another build. I mounted the BMS on the small aluminum plate, put some Kapton inside and some spacers. Make sure really any contact does not touch the metal surface. So the plan is the BMS goes here. There's not much space, but it seems like it fits. Those screws, either use flathead countersunk ones, or I use plastic screws, which is even better, and grinded the head a little bit away because it's in the way for the battery box. So now let's connect all of the cables. Okay, so about the balance slits from the Xlite BMS. This is the first 5 wires. It goes to this connector, and it's gonna go to this connector. I'm gonna make it something like this, and then back. So this is the first pack. On the first pack, you need to connect all of the 5 wires. While on the second 4 packs, we need to skip the first wire. I'm gonna show you a design. Why do I need to skip the first wire? It's this one, and this one are the same, and they come from the balance slits from both packs. And you really don't want to breach the packs through the small wires of the BMS. You want it to be breached only here with the thick wire. This is why, since from the negative is the wire number 1, this is then wire number 5 here, and this one, the negative, would be the same wire. So we skip that and we go to this one. The next wire goes on the second wire of the balance connector of the second pack. While you may ask why I put the wire even here if it's not needed, it's because if you want to balance the packs manually with a hobby charger or something like this, you will need all of the wires. But they must not go breached to the BMS, only one wire needs to go. So what I do, I just pull out one pin of this connector, so you don't even have it exposed, and just solder the next 4 that you need for the second pack. So this is the first connector. I'm adding fuses here, 2 amp fuses like this. Some of you may say this is an overkill, but I think it's definitely something that might save your BMS or anything else in case you maybe connect something wrong or something bad happens. I don't know. You just cannot fail by putting additional fuses. That's what I think. So let's continue. Wire up everything. Also the temperature sensors, and I will show you how it looks at the end. How is this all gonna go together? As you can see, I've only used cable glands on both sides of the battery connection cable. I'm not gonna put any connectors in between, because there are gonna be connectors inside this box. They're already here, and there's gonna be connectors on this end. So actually this whole cable can stay in between. If it will need a replacement, then anyway you need to rewire everything. So I think the connector here is not needed. We'll see how it turns out. While on this side I might do a connector out of the cable gland. I'll see, I'm still working on that. Bye bye. A few things to consider. This is going to be our spot where the heat from the controller is going to be transferred to the rails on both sides. So we'll add thermal paste between those two pieces of aluminum. Another thing about waterproofing the board. As you can see, it's going to be like this. Here we'll add a gasket later. Down there it's all covered and sealed up. The only place still exposed is actually this edge between the rail and the controller box. Same with the battery side. So we'll add some silicone just on this edge while assembling those two parts together. Just added some vinyl stickers here because those are not gonna be able to go on later when the rails are on. I just installed the right rail. Now I installed the motor cable. There's an optional of having here some bullet 4mm connectors and a connector for the hall sensors. I'm not gonna do that now for the first version. This cable gland is also gonna be reachable from top, but not as nicely as when the left rail is off. So let's put the left rail on and see what we got here. Don't forget the thermal paste here and some silicone on this edge and this one. This is how I wired up the motor phase wires. They just get out of this cable gland and straight into the FOCer with bullet connectors. As for the Hall sensor one, I wired it directly here, so it looks kind of okay. And if you want to take the motor out, you will unplug all of this, release the cable gland a bit, and just pull all of these wires out, including this connector. If you turn it for 90 degrees, it will go out to the cable gland, so removing the motor for a tire or any other change won't be a big deal with this design. Let's see what we have on the other side. I did this wire loom like weeks ago. I don't even remember what I packed inside. That's the main negative from the real battery. That's the main positive from the real battery. Then we have 3 wires for the BMS, because like 2, the plus and the minus from the charging port are going back, and then the output, the minus, is wired directly here to the main negative of the battery, while the main positive is going back here, because this is the main positive of the whole battery. So this is why we have 3 wires for the BMS. And then I have 2 cables with 6 wires, I think, each. I labeled them. One is lights, one is BMS. I got it written down with the colors how I did it. I don't remember at the moment, but basically we need to get this BMS connector in the back, same as this temperature sensor of the battery in the back. This is in one cable, I guess, and in the other there is BMS CAN data and power for rear lights. This is all in those 2 cables. So I gotta take a look at my notes from a few weeks ago, how I plan to wire all of this up, and yeah, just wire the front. The back is basically done and should be good to go soon. Like this red wire that's coming here is the positive from the battery number 4, and it actually goes, the red wire, to the black wire, to the negative of the battery pack number 5, because this is how serial connection works. from positive to negative. Just don't try to recreate it if you're not sure what you're doing, because yeah, it might be a bit confusing and tricky for the beginners to understand all of it, so just don't do it before you are really sure what you're doing. Just wired the positive battery from that side here to the negative of the fifth pack. Now if all is correct, we should have something less than 80 volts if you put one probe here between here. Yeah, now we have 70 volts. That's fine. So this negative is now the main negative that needs to go to the FOCer, so here. This positive is the one that goes here as well, but we'll put a fuse in between, and there needs to be the charger wired up as well here. Maxi blade fuse, this is how I do it. Solder on this connector, and I put a fuse right here in this corner. There's not much other space. Let me finish it and I'll show you how it's gonna look at the end. Okay, one side of the fuse is done. Second part is gonna include 3 wires. The thick one that goes to the controller. The right one is gonna be the return from the BMS, while the tiny one is gonna be the source of power for the DC-DC converter for lights and such. For those of you who are asking yourself where to get such a connector for the maxi blade fuse, you get it if you disassemble this. It's inside here. It's the standard holder for the maxi blade fuses. So those pins are inside, and I prefer just to take them out and put a shrink tube than using this big part. It's the same. So that's how I do it. This way it takes the smallest amount of place possible. Okay, about the question on how to turn on and off the DC converter for the lights. Looks like all is connected now. There's this DC converter, there's a switch unit that I made for lights and the voltage display. I need to tidy up the cables, make it look nicer, and of course try if everything works, you know. I just think all is connected, but we need to see if all works. Just some thoughts about the compatibility. This is the battery box, so the rear of the board. I will show you that it fits the original bumper. You can see it fits perfectly. It aligns with the battery box. Because this is now just a 3D print and I don't want the battery to be exposed to any rocks you hit, so I designed a plate with all the nice information about the build, and I wanted to install it like this because this is gonna be turned upside down because this is the bottom part. So you can see the plate perfectly fits and covers all the battery area and protects the battery. And I kinda like this idea, so I would actually wanna keep it. But since I'm building this so slowly, things have changed during the build. Ideas came up, and I went to Sacramento and bought the banks from the Float Life. So this idea is very nice, but let's agree this one's better, and I plan to use the banks. And as you can see, the banks as well as the original bumpers fit on the battery box that VXwheel 3 uses just perfectly. So let's mount them on and continue on the front side. Let me show you what's up here. We have a slight gap here. Let's put some silicone around here to avoid any water entering the battery box before installing the bumpers. It's gonna be isolated from the top side as well, so that's kinda enough. All shiny. Now as you can see, the top stock bumper fits as well quite nicely, with the small gap that I created here. So the idea is, if you don't install this plate, and it's not necessary, it's totally an optional thing, you will fit stock and bang or whatever bumpers straight away if you use this plate, then let's do some digging and it will fit soon. I do it with this tool because it's easier to set the depth, how deep you want to dig. And yeah, it doesn't even look that bad. If you do it nicely, it's kind of okay. Should fit now. Okay, the top bank bumper fits perfectly. I need to order the right screw length, but that's not important right now. I'm gonna change it. The display is very nicely inside as planned. The handle works. The lights are perfectly aligned. It kind of looks very well. Just finished creating the front footpad with the cable from the sensors. I added the pull down resistors just here in the shrink tube. Yeah, that's kind of it. All that needs to be done now is, you know, basically try it out, do the settings, and I don't know, go riding. Many people ask how my open top battery and controller box work. It's an aluminum plate under the footpad, screwed in the footpad, so it's completely flat surface on the edge, and it just presses on this gasket, and so far it's successful for me. Battery compartment is all tied up with cable ties. Everything's in place. Those are my cable holders. They go right here into the rail, and with the screw from here to hold the cable inside the rail while it passes through here. It's nothing new, people use them, it's also in the original design. I just designed my own. An M3 lock nut goes into the spot right there. You press it in from the bottom, screw from here, and there you go, cable is in place. Getting these circles up here was not an easy job. I think it took me like 1 hour for both sides. I need to figure out what to do with these rails. I did engrave my logo on it. It's kinda nice, but I'm not gonna leave the original color of the rails. I also created this thing because, you know, just to get this one away. I don't know why, but I'm gonna try to make the rails purple and green. We'll see how that turns out. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something also today, and see you next time.